in the sprawling expanse of the Pacific Ocean, beneath skies that had witnessed the most devastating naval warfare in human history. A single aircraft cast a shadow of terror across Allied forces. One of Japan's most feared weapons had carved a path of destruction from Pearl Harbor to the farthest reaches of Southeast Asia. Yet hidden within its elegant frame lay fatal flaws that would ultimately seal its doom and transform the course of World War II. The year 1941 marked the dawn of a new era in aerial warfare, when Japanese naval aviators piloting their revolutionary Zero fighters shocked the world with their seemingly impossible capabilities. In the skies over China, these extraordinary machines had achieved a staggering 12-to-1 kill ratio against Chinese forces, establishing a reputation that struck fear into the hearts of Allied commanders. The Zero's dominance appeared absolute, its performance almost supernatural compared to anything the Allies possessed. Conceived in the brilliant mind of Jiro Horikoshi at Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, the Zero emerged from Japan's urgent need for a carrier-based fighter capable of escorting bombers across the vast Pacific distances. Horikoshi, born near Fujioka in 1903, had entered Tokyo Imperial University's newly formed Aeronautical Engineering Department in 1924, graduating with the highest honors before joining Mitsubishi in 1927. His employer recognized his exceptional talent, sending him to England, Germany, and the United States to study the latest aviation technology, where he absorbed knowledge that would later prove crucial in creating Japan's most iconic warplane. The Zero's design philosophy represented a radical departure from conventional fighter aircraft. Horikoshi's team made the revolutionary decision to prioritize maneuverability and range above all else, creating an aircraft that could turn on a dime while maintaining enough fuel capacity to reach targets over 1,900 miles away. This extraordinary range capability meant that Zero fighters could escort Japanese bombers to distant Chinese targets and return home, something previously thought impossible for carrier-based aircraft. To achieve this remarkable performance, the Zero's engineers employed cutting-edge aluminum alloy construction, utilizing a material called extra super duralumin that made the aircraft incredibly lightweight. Every component was meticulously designed to save weight, with elaborate lightning holes drilled through structural elements and complex manufactured units that required extensive man-hours to produce. The result was an aircraft weighing just 3,704 pounds empty, significantly lighter than its Allied counterparts. When the Zero first entered combat over China in September 1940, the results were nothing short of spectacular. Flying against Chinese nationalist forces, Japanese pilots achieved victory after victory, their nimble fighters dancing through the sky with an agility that defied belief. The aircraft's combination of two 20mm cannons and two 7.7mm machine guns provided devastating firepower, while its exceptional maneuverability allowed pilots to outfly virtually any opponent. The Zero's first taste of global attention came on December 7, 1941, during the infamous attack on Pearl Harbor. 80 Zero fighters accompanied the devastating bomber formations, their mission encompassing both escort duties and ground strafing attacks. As the Japanese strike force swept across Pearl Harbor and surrounding airfields, the Zeros demonstrated their lethal capabilities by shooting down any American aircraft unlucky enough to take to the air, while simultaneously strafing crew members on battleship decks and aircraft parked on the ground. The Pearl Harbor attack showcased the Zero's versatility as both an air superiority fighter and ground attack platform. Japanese pilots used their 20mm cannons to devastating effect, spreading death and destruction across Hickam Field and Ford Island. The psychological impact was immense. American defenders witnessed firsthand the shocking superiority of Japanese aviation technology, shattering preconceived notions about Japanese industrial capabilities. Following Pearl Harbor, the Zero's reign of terror expanded across the Pacific theater. In the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, and the Dutch East Indies, Japanese fighters systematically destroyed Allied air forces with ruthless efficiency. No Allied fighter could match the Zero in a traditional turning dogfight, not even the legendary Supermarine Spitfire. British pilots trained in European combat methods found their tactics suicidal against the acrobatic Japanese fighters, as Lieutenant General Claire Lee Chennault noted from his observations in China. The early months of 1942 witnessed the Zero at the pinnacle of its power. During the Japanese blitzkrieg across Southeast Asia, Zero squadrons annihilated opposition wherever they appeared. British forces in Malaya discovered that their traditional fighter tactics, developed for combat against German and Italian aircraft, proved utterly ineffective against the agile Japanese machines. The Zeros could outturn any Allied fighter with contemptuous ease, sustain climbs at impossibly steep angles, and remain airborne 3 times longer than their opponents. However, beneath the Zero's fearsome reputation lay a web of vulnerabilities that astute observers were beginning to detect. Claire Lee Chennault, the prescient American aviation advisor serving in China, had begun documenting the Zero's weaknesses as early as 1940. Chennault, a retired United States Army captain who had become the architect of Chinese air defense, possessed an analytical mind that saw beyond the Zero's impressive performance envelope. Working with his American volunteer group, known as the Flying Tigers, Chennault developed revolutionary tactics specifically designed to exploit the Zero's limitations. He forbade his pilots from engaging the nimble Japanese fighters in turning battles, instead training them to use their Curtiss P-40 Warhawk's superior diving speed and rugged construction to their advantage. The Flying Tigers' tactics involved diving attacks, followed by immediate disengagement, never allowing the Zeros to force them into the turning fights where Japanese pilots excelled. The success of Chennault's methods was remarkable. Flying with just 43 serviceable P-40 fighters and 84 former United States military pilots, the Flying Tigers achieved a kill ratio that far exceeded contemporary Allied air groups fighting in Malaya, the Philippines, and elsewhere in the Pacific Theater. They were credited with destroying 296 enemy aircraft while losing only 14 pilots in combat, a testament to the effectiveness of proper tactics against the vaunted Zero. But the most significant breakthrough in understanding the Zero's vulnerabilities came not from combat experience, but from an extraordinary stroke of fortune in the remote Aleutian Islands. On June 4, 1942, during the diversionary phase of the Battle of Midway, 19-year-old Flight Petty Officer First Class Tadayoshi Koga launched from the Japanese aircraft carrier Ryuho as part of a raid on Dutch Harbor, Alaska. Flying a pristine A6M Model 21-0, Koga represented the cream of Japanese naval aviation, superbly trained, experienced, and flying the world's most advanced carrier fighter. During this strafing run over Dutch Harbor, small arms fire from American defenders struck Koga's aircraft, severing the oil line and dooming the engine. With his aircraft rapidly losing power and oil pressure dropping, Koga faced an emergency landing on nearby Akutan Island. The grassy flat he selected appeared suitable, but hidden beneath the vegetation lay treacherous marshland that would prove fatal. As Koga's Zero touched down, the landing gear immediately mired in the soft ground, causing the aircraft to flip inverted and skid to a stop. The young pilot died instantly from massive head trauma, but his aircraft survived the crash remarkably intact. The other Zero pilots in Koga's formation, believing their comrade might still be alive, chose not to strafe his downed aircraft, a decision that would have catastrophic consequences for Japan's war effort. For over a month, Koga Zero lay undiscovered in the Aleutian wilderness. American forces had more pressing concerns than searching remote islands for downed enemy aircraft. However, on July 10, 1942, a United States Navy patrol accidentally stumbled upon the crashed fighter. What they found was beyond their wildest expectations, a virtually complete example of Japan's most feared weapon, resting upside down but structurally intact. The recovery operation that followed represented one of the most significant intelligence coups of the Pacific War. American personnel carefully extracted the Zero from its marshy resting place and shipped it to Naval Air Station North Island in San Diego, where Mitsubishi's most closely guarded secrets would finally be revealed. Japanese historian and Japan Air Self-Defense Force Lieutenant General Masatake Okumiya later stated that the acquisition of the Akutan Zero was no less serious than Japan's defeat at the Battle of Midway, and that it did much to hasten Japan's final defeat. The restoration process required 2 months of meticulous work. American technicians painstakingly repaired damaged components, replaced the aircraft's distinctive red Hinomaru roundels with United States markings, and prepared the fighter for its most important mission, revealing its secrets to Allied engineers and test pilots. The Zero was kept under 24-hour military police guard to prevent souvenir hunters from damaging this priceless intelligence asset. On September 20th, 1942, Lieutenant Commander Eddie R. Sanders took the restored Akutan Zero aloft for its first test flight under American control. Sanders, an experienced naval aviator and test pilot, would conduct 24 test flights over the following month, systematically probing every aspect of the Zero's performance. His findings would revolutionize Allied fighter tactics and aircraft development. Sanders's initial flight immediately exposed critical weaknesses that Allied pilots could exploit with proper tactics. The most significant discovery was that the Zero's ailerons froze up at speeds above 200 knots, making rolling maneuvers slow and laborious at high velocity. This meant that Allied pilots could escape pursuing Zeros by entering high-speed dives, where the Japanese fighter's superior maneuverability became a liability rather than an asset. Nor, further testing revealed additional vulnerabilities that would prove crucial in developing counter-tactics. The Zero rolled to the left much easier than to the right, creating a predictable weakness that skilled pilots could exploit. Perhaps most significantly, the aircraft's float-type carburetor caused the engine to cut out under negative acceleration, stopping power delivery during steep dives. This flaw provided Allied pilots with a reliable escape mechanism by entering negative G dives. They could disable the Zero's engine, while their own fighters continued at full power. The intelligence gathered from the Akutan Zero immediately began influencing Allied aircraft development and tactical doctrine. Grumman Aircraft Corporation, already working on a successor to the F6F Wildcat, incorporated lessons learned from the captured Zero into their new F6F Hellcat design. The Hellcat would become specifically tailored as a Zero killer, designed from the outset to neutralize the Japanese fighter's advantages while exploiting its weaknesses. While engineers studied the captured Zero, combat pilots were developing new tactical approaches based on growing understanding of the aircraft's limitations. Lieutenant Commander John "Jimmy" Thach, commanding Fighting Squadron 3 aboard USS Yorktown, had spent months devising innovative fighter tactics using matchsticks on his kitchen table. Working with intelligence reports about the Zero's extraordinary maneuverability, Thach developed what became known as the Thach Weave, a defensive formation that could neutralize even the most maneuverable opponent. The Thach Weave represented a revolutionary approach to fighter combat. Instead of attempting to outturn the Zero, Thach's tactic involved 2 American fighters flying parallel courses that would weave back and forth, creating crossing flight paths. When a Zero attacked one fighter, the bait, that pilot would turn toward his wingman, who would be positioned to attack the pursuing Japanese aircraft. The maneuver required precise timing and coordination, but it effectively neutralized the Zero's turning advantage. The first combat test of the Thach Weave came during the Battle of Midway on June 4, 1942. Thach himself led 6 F4F Wildcats as escort for torpedo bombers attacking the Japanese carrier force. When 15 to 20 Zeros dove to attack the American formation, Thach immediately implemented his new tactic. Despite being outnumbered and flying inferior aircraft, Thach's pilots shot down multiple Zeros while suffering minimal losses. The success of the Thach Weave marked a turning point in Pacific air combat. For the first time, American pilots had demonstrated that proper tactics could overcome the Zero's technological advantages. Marine ace Kenneth Walsh, who would eventually be credited with destroying 21 Zeros, later testified to the tactic's effectiveness. Knowing what to do with a Zero on my tail, information that came from Koga's Zero, saved my life several times. As 1943 dawned, the balance of power in the Pacific began shifting decisively against Japan. The introduction of new American fighters, combined with improved tactics and the intelligence gleaned from the Akutan Zero, systematically eroded the Zero's dominance. The Grumman F6F Hellcat entered combat in September 1943, immediately demonstrating its superiority over the aging Japanese design. The Hellcat represented everything the Zero was not: heavily armored, powerfully armed, and built to absorb punishment, while delivering devastating firepower. Powered by a 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, the Hellcat possessed the speed and climb rate necessary to dictate the terms of engagement. Its 650 caliber machine guns delivered overwhelming firepower compared to the Zero's limited armament, while pilot armor and self-sealing fuel tanks provided protection that Japanese pilots could only dream of. The Hellcat's design philosophy directly addressed the Zero's known weaknesses while maximizing American industrial advantages. Where the Zero sacrificed protection for performance, the Hellcat achieved superior performance while maintaining robust defensive systems. The American fighter could dive faster than the Zero, match its climb rate at higher altitudes, and absorb battle damage that would have destroyed the fragile Japanese aircraft. Other advanced American fighters soon joined the assault on Zero supremacy. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning, with its distinctive twin-boom configuration and twin-engine reliability, proved devastatingly effective in the Pacific theater. The P-38 was credited with destroying more Japanese aircraft than any other United States Army Air Forces fighter, with American aces like Richard Bong achieving 40 victories and Thomas Maguire 38 victories flying the type. The Vought F-4U Corsair, nicknamed Whistling Death by Japanese pilots due to its distinctive engine sound, brought even more devastating capabilities to the Pacific conflict. With a top speed of 446 miles per hour and powered by the same massive R2800 engine as the Hellcat, the Corsair achieved an astounding 11-to-1 kill ratio against Japanese aircraft. The aircraft's versatility as both a fighter and ground attack platform made it invaluable during the island hopping campaigns that would carry Allied forces ever closer to Japan. By late 1943, the Zero's technological obsolescence was becoming undeniable. Japan's delayed development of a successor aircraft compounded the problem. The A7M Repu, intended to replace the Zero, didn't achieve its first flight until May 1944. Even then, only 9 examples would ever be built before war's end, as Japan's industrial capacity crumbled under relentless Allied bombing and resource shortages. The human factor proved equally devastating to Japanese air power. Early in the war, Japanese naval pilots were superbly trained professionals with hundreds of hours of flight experience. None of the pilots involved in the Pearl Harbor attack had logged less than 600 hours of flying time, with many flight leaders possessing over 1,500 hours of experience. This elite corps of aviators had made the Zero's early successes possible, their skill compensating for any tactical disadvantages. However, as the war progressed, Japan's pilot training program collapsed under the pressure of mounting losses and resource constraints. By 1944, the average flight training time for Japanese Navy pilots had plummeted to just 300 hours, while Army pilots received only 200 hours. In the war's final phase, new Japanese pilots graduated with as little as 40 hours of total flight time, compared to over 500 hours for their American counterparts. This dramatic disparity in training quality had catastrophic consequences for Japanese air power. American pilots received comprehensive instruction in navigation, gunnery, formation flying, and emergency procedures before entering combat. Japanese pilots, desperate to replace mounting losses, were rushed into action with minimal preparation. The result was a steady degradation in the quality of Japanese opposition, even as American pilot proficiency continued to improve. The Great Marianas Turkey shoot of June 19, 1944, demonstrated the complete reversal of fortune in Pacific air combat. During this epic carrier battle, Admiral Mark Mitcher's Task Force 58 repelled 4 successive Japanese raids, totaling 326 aircraft. American Hellcat pilots claimed 380 kills in a single day, with only 26 American fighters lost. The lopsided nature of the combat earned it the nickname Turkey Shoot, reflecting how easily American pilots dispatched their Japanese opponents. The battle's outcome illustrated the complete transformation of Pacific air warfare since 1941. Where once the Zero had dominated through superior maneuverability and pilot skill, American fighters now possessed overwhelming advantages in speed, firepower, protection, and pilot training. The Japanese aircraft that had once struck terror into Allied hearts now served as little more than target practice for confident American aviators. As 1944 progressed into 1945, Japan's desperate situation forced increasingly extreme measures. With conventional air power exhausted and the Zero hopelessly outclassed, Japanese commanders turned to kamikaze tactics as their final option. The same aircraft that had once dominated Pacific skies now served as flying bombs. Their pilots trained for just 40 to 50 hours before embarking on suicide missions. The first organized kamikaze attacks began on October 25, 1944. During the Battle of Leyte Gulf, these desperate strikes achieved some tactical successes. The escort carrier USS St. Lo became the first major warship sunk by kamikaze attack, going down in just 30 minutes with 114 crew members killed. Other carriers, including USS Senti, USS Suwannee, and USS Kalinin Bay, suffered varying degrees of damage from the suicide attackers. Perhaps the most devastating kamikaze attack came on May 11, 1945, when 2 Zeros penetrated the defenses around USS Bunker Hill, off Okinawa. The attack killed 396 American sailors and airmen, making it the single deadliest kamikaze strike of the war. Despite the horrific casualties, the attack failed to sink the heavily armored fleet carrier, demonstrating the futility of Japan's final desperate strategy. The kamikaze campaign represented the tragic final chapter of the Zero's operational history. Aircraft that had once symbolized Japanese technological superiority and pilot excellence now served as crude weapons of desperation. The elite aviators who had made the Zero legendary were long dead, replaced by hastily trained young men with barely enough flight experience to reach their targets. By the war's end, in August 1945, the Zero's transformation from feared predator to hapless victim was complete. American industrial might had produced over 12,000 F6F Hellcats alone, while Japanese aircraft production had collapsed under bombing and resource shortages. The technological gap that had briefly favored Japan in 1941 had become an unbridgeable chasm, with American fighters generations ahead of their Japanese opponents. The story of how the Allies overcame the Zero fighter reveals the complex interplay of technology, tactics, intelligence, and industrial capacity that determined the Pacific War's outcome. What began as a tale of Japanese technological supremacy ultimately became a demonstration of American adaptability and industrial might. The capture of a single aircraft on a remote Aleutian island provided the key insights needed to develop effective countermeasures, while American engineering and manufacturing capabilities produced the weapons needed to exploit those insights. The Zero's decline also highlighted the importance of pilot training and tactical doctrine in modern warfare. No matter how advanced an aircraft might be, it could not overcome the disadvantages of poorly trained pilots flying outdated tactics against superior opponents. Japan's failure to maintain pilot training standards while simultaneously developing new aircraft technology contributed significantly to their air power's collapse. Most significantly, the Zero's story demonstrated that technological advantages in warfare are inherently temporary. What appears invincible at one moment can become obsolete the next, as opponents adapt their tactics and develop countermeasures. The aircraft that once seemed to possess almost supernatural capabilities was revealed to be a machine with very human limitations, limitations that could be understood, analyzed, and ultimately exploited. From the smoking ruins of Pearl Harbor to the surrender ceremony aboard USS Missouri, the Mitsubishi A6M Zero had traversed the complete arc of warfare's possibilities. It had begun as an instrument of conquest, carrying the rising sun across the Pacific in a blaze of apparent invincibility. It ended as a symbol of desperation, piloted by undertrained boys on one-way missions that could not alter war's inevitable conclusion. In that transformation lay all the tragedy and futility of human conflict, where the highest expressions of technological achievement serve ultimately only to demonstrate the terrible cost of nations' ambitions and the resilience of those who refuse to yield to tyranny.